No, in all seriousness, what happened this week was pretty historic, right? You have, in this political climate, I think it's so interesting when you think about a year ago when Trump became president, and then obviously, God, we're like almost 11 months into this administration. It's just one horror after one horror. And on the other side of things, you have someone like Zohran Mamdani in this political climate who's able to be elected with quite a mandate and a lot of support and a lot of excitement from a spectrum of people, some in the center, though a lot on the progressive end of the spectrum, of course, to be the next mayor of New York City. And it was a nationally and I would say internationally watched election. And Laura Loomer's upset, as well as many other right-wingers are. So I'd like to go to our first clip of that right-wing meltdown.
I'm literally in tears. I'm having a hard time keeping a straight face.
Nearly 1 million New Yorkers are ready to flee the city because of Mamdani's win and becoming the next mayor.
I think this Mamdani win and his ensuing acceptance speech is, you know, the nail in the coffin for New York.
This is a socialist revolution. This is a takeover of the Democratic Party.
You have an outright Marxist who's running the capitalist capital of the world.
The communist as the mayor of the largest city in the nation.
This is an Islamic extremist.
Zohran Mamdani is without a doubt the biggest win for socialism in the history of the country.
You say, oh, this is just New York. No, it's not just New York.
Not anymore.
This
not
could
anymore.
be coming to a city in a town near you.
Inshallah. I hope more people like Zohran Mamdani can be in positions of power in this country, because his politics are definitely a lot better than everybody else to the right of him who have positions of power. That said, I mean, he is a democratic socialist, which isn't, an out-and-out socialist. It's a bit different, and that's like more specific thing we can get to. But I think that the meltdown is real, and I understand why. Because in this country, there is no space for even a modicum of policies that could benefit the welfare of working class people. And that's the platform he ran on, right? He ran on affordability. He ran on, and these are like not radical ideas, actually. Like a raise of 2% in the tax rate for like corporations and people who make us, like, he wants to basically tax billionaires 2% higher. That's a pretty standard part of even some mainstream Democrats' platforms, actually. He wants some subsidized grocery stores, it shouldn't be a radical thing. A few free buses shouldn't be a radical thing. But we live in such a right-wing country that these policies, which, these are just like policies that actually could protect capitalism from complete overthrow and revolution, actually, because this country's become so unequal. But these policies with slight tweaks that could benefit millions of people a little bit are causing this panic and meltdown. And I should say that was a panic and meltdown by specifically right-wing figures.
I think I saw Rick Santorum at the end there. What a blast from the past.
Right-wing, and also mixed in with so much Islamophobia and racism. It's actually quite unbelievable. But let's not forget, the Democratic Party was so against Mamdani because they're also so right-wing that they backed Andrew Cuomo, a woman who has assaulted over a dozen women sexually, to run as an independent against Mamdani because Mamdani won the Democratic primary. And they were engaging in the same sort of Islamophobia, the same sort of red baiting. And you know what? That's what I think is so significant about this election. The red baiting didn't work. The red baiting didn't work. The word socialism did not work in the financial capital of this country, full of so much wealth inequality and rich people. It didn't work to stop people from voting for this guy.
Yeah, and in a way, I'm not surprised because the number of rich people is a very small number of people. And the appeal against Mamdani was essentially an appeal to the minority of residents of the city of New York, because the level of unaffordability of New York City is so outrageous. I mean, I was talking to someone about this the other day, and not the other day, this is actually last year, but about the New York Times calculator thing about buying a home, and how it was basically there is no value whatsoever in buying a home in New York City because the cost is so high. You will not get the thing that most people want when you buy a home, which is the equity in the home and the ability to build wealth over time, that just will not happen. And in fact, what you should do is just save your money and then move out of the city and buy a home somewhere somewhere else. And I just thought, it's one thing, and we're talking about renters, we're talking about working class people, but when the number one route established for middle class people to build wealth, to sort of, cement them in feeling that capitalism does something for them, is no longer operative in New York City, that should tell you how bad things have really gotten. And I think that is the Mamdani effect. And I think when you look at the context of things, we've seen multiple different polls that have said something similar, national polls going back into 2023 now, that super majorities of people feel that that things have to change massively in the US economy. We've seen the now discontinued by the Trump administration Census Bureau household pulse survey that showed every 2 weeks that 100 some odd million people were having at least a little trouble making ends meet week to week. So almost the entire workforce is having at least a little trouble, and maybe 50 to 40 million of them at different times are having quite a bit of trouble, basically barely keeping their head above water. I think we've seen the Bernie Sanders effect. We've seen the uprising after George Floyd was killed. We've seen so many different examples of how angry people are. In some ways, in a kind of funhouse mirror, Alice in Wonderland kind of way, even Trump's election speak to this, that people are so dissatisfied with the status quo that they are willing to look and to do and to see things that maybe in the past would be considered beyond the pale.
Yeah.
And I think that Mamdani, as you're saying, was not really saying anything radical. He was saying things that made sense. He was saying things that are obviously possible that it wouldn't even hurt rich people. I mean, and this, you say
you still get to keep your yachts, guys.
I mean, Joe Biden wanted to increase the top tax rate about 2%. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think Joe Biden, in a way, said it best in the 2020 campaign to that famous set of donors of rich people. Nothing will fundamentally change. Even though I'm saying I'm going to increase taxes and do this, nothing will fundamentally change because you have so much money. $4 trillion in profit for U.S. corporations in 2024. $4 trillion in profit. $4 trillion. And they sent $1 trillion of that in dividends, basically, to other rich people who own stocks, right? So it's there's no shortage of money. There's no shortage of income. I mean, you're living in New York City. I don't even know what the GDP is in New York City, $1 trillion, $2 trillion. I mean, it's a huge GDP like that. Massive, one of the biggest industries on the planet Earth, Wall Street. So it's none of this would make any sense. But nonetheless, I think the point you're making is correct, is that despite all of the red baiting, all of the money, all of the demonization, he still won. And this is the final thing, and I'll turn it back to you. And I think it's part of what we've been saying a lot across many shows on Breakthrough News. The sort of MAGA agenda, the right-wing agenda, the agenda that says Mamdani is too radical, those people are a minority of the country. Mm-hmm. A majority of the country feel like this is too far, which is why the Republicans got wiped out all across the board. I mean, a lot of people are talking about the Virginia and New Jersey governor, but even in Mississippi, Republicans lost their supermajority in the state Senate. Now, that might seem small to some people, but Republicans are so in control of Mississippi, it's inconceivable just a year ago that this could happen. In Georgia, in the Public Service Commission, and by the way, one of the biggest challenges for working families right now is the rising cost of electricity going up 6-7% year on year. The Public Service Commission in Georgia, 2 Democrats won, first statewide race that was not Senate or outside of federal office that they won in over a decade. I mean, so you could see in all sorts of different types of races, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, the governors, the mayor of New York, the people in the United States were look, it's too much. All this giving $1 trillion to rich people, cutting Medicaid, cutting the ACA, driving up the cost of everything, destroying it. We need something different. And I think Zohran represents, in the way that Abigail Spangenberg does not represent anything different, former CIA agent, middle of the road type person. But in a way, Abigail Spangenberg is riding Zohran's coattails. Mickey Sherrill in New Jersey is riding Zohran's coattails. I don't think people would be coming out in big ways for them if they didn't feel like this was a moment to take a stand. And I think that's why Zohran has attracted so much attention, is yes, it's New York City, but he's the most representative of this broader phenomenon happening around the country of people standing up and saying, we're taking a stand against this elite ultra right-wing agenda, and we're going to actually turn around and fight back.
And a part of that elite right-wing agenda is unconditional ongoing support for Israeli settler colonialism in U.S. imperialism in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And so that's another, I think, significant aspect of this campaign, is that Zohran Mamdani, I actually saw a video of him yesterday. I'm not sure when it was from, but it was him explaining what radicalized him. And he said it was the issue of Palestine. And I think there's a lot of people, I always ask people that question, especially people on the left, right? I'm always what radicalized you? What radicalizing in a good way, by the way. I mean that in a positive sense. And Palestine is 75% of the time the thing that drew people in to their politics. And so all that's to say, he started out which is a city council member, right?
State senator.
Sorry, state senator. And he was very outspoken on Palestine, both before October 7th and after, and against the genocide in Gaza, kept calling it a genocide despite his growth in the polls. On the debate stage, I mean, we all remember on the debate stage in the Democratic primary, when everybody was asked, it was like satire almost, what's the first place you're gonna go visit like after you get elected mayor that's outside of the country? And it was Israel, Israel, Israel. One guy said Ukraine and Israel.
Yeah, and I think someone said Jamaica, because their
I
parents are
missed
from
that.
Jamaica.
Okay, that's fair, right? And then it gets to Zohran Mamdani, and he said, I'm gonna stay right here in New York City. And everybody was like horrified. They were like, what? You're not going to go to Israel?
In
Answer
fact,
for that.
Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene brought it up on Tucker Carlson's show, and they said, how is it that this communist is the only one saying
I can tell them why, by the way.
Yeah.
But all that's to say, and then he makes it, he wins. And then in the debates, Cuomo, and even on every major channel Cuomo went on, just kept hammering on Israel, Palestine. Every time some other times it would be that, he's friends with Hassan Piker, who said this thing about 9/11. God, Andrew Cuomo made Hassan Piker so much more famous. And then also Andrew Cuomo got increasingly Islamophobic and laughed when somebody said, imagine a Muslim's in charge the next 9/11 happens. But all that's to say, he kept calling it a genocide. He still supports BDS. And this is, I think the significance of this, especially if you're a part of the political elite in this country, is to sit there and watch as somebody can win mayor of New York in spite of their pro-Palestinian stance. Or maybe because of, right? And that's a shift in politics in this country. Because what this proved, and it doesn't mean it's the same everywhere, but what this proved is that in a city that has the second largest Jewish population in the world, many of whom did, by the way, support Zohran Mamdani.
I think amongst under 35.
Oh,
the
vast majority,
yeah.
right. But so this idea that Jews are all terrified of him, which I'll get to in a second, because that's what Jonathan Greenblatt is saying. But this demonstrated that you can win on a platform that is opposed to Zionism and supports the rights of Palestinians. And I say that because that is going to definitely change the way that lobbying is done in this country. And it's definitely got people freaking out like, oh my God, because this kind of sets a precedent. And then it'll inspire others and running in other places who won't be so scared to speak out on this issue like it's going to ruin my political career. Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the Anti-Defamation League, which falsely labels itself a civil rights organization, was actually an anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian hate group, went on MSNBC and said something really insane. And can we go ahead and play that clip, please, John?
That young man, and if he's 34, I can call him a young man. He won the greatest landslide probably in New York history. I mean, certainly in recent times. And he used that moment to say that he will fight anti-Semitism in New York and stand shoulder to shoulder with his Jewish brothers and sisters.
So again, I'm going to judge him not on what he says in a speech, but on what he does over time. This morning, and I will tell you, I've gotten so many calls from Jewish New Yorkers who are alarmed. Their kid was harassed in college. Their child was bullied in K through 12. Their synagogue was vandalized. So here's what ADL is doing right now. If you are a Jewish New Yorker, we have your back, and we will hold Mamdani, Mayor-elect Mamdani, accountable. Look, it's not about politics. This morning we launched a tip line at adl.org NYC. So if you are Jewish and you experience anti-Semitism where you work or where you worship or where you live, we want to know so we can track it.
Well, and
look, I tell you,
there has been anti-Semitism in New York that we've talked about time and time again. Yeah. This isn't something new because he got elected last night.
It's amazing. Jonathan Greenblatt sitting there saying, it's going to be a dangerous place for Jews now. And also, it's just completely outrageous, the level of desperation these people are engaging in right now. That's desperate. And of course, you've actually seen that there have been, and I'm not saying there are plenty of anti-Semites out there. Anti-Semitic hate incidents absolutely do take place. But there have been a number of incidences as well where the police have found, actually some Zionist basically did this to try to make like Arabs and Muslims look bad. That's happened a few times across the country. There's mainstream media reports about it. So now people are concerned that there's going to be an attempt by like someone like Jonathan Greenblatt or someone who has that, mentality to go and do something like that to like make Zohran look bad or try to push him against engaging in anything that's BDS. But all that's to say, this to me looks so desperate, and behaving like that when you have even Joe Scarborough being like, whoa, just shows that like you and your ideas are so increasingly desperate and unpopular.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think obviously anyone who's followed the ADL sees that they have a double standard policy. I mean, just look at what, Jonathan Greenblatt had to say about Kevin Roberts and the whole controversy over, Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson and the Heritage Foundation. I don't want to get into it, but just look into it. You can see that there's obviously a double standard there. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously notable. I mean, I will say that you can win the mayoralty of New York with a pro-Palestine program to a degree, because Zohran also did some dancing around it for things that wouldn't be so popular, insofar as the Palestinian people who, have the internationally recognized right to resist, which he does not recognize, and which he went out of his way to say, essentially, in order to allay, quote unquote, people's fears. The sort of smear campaign against him for not saying globalize the Intifada, I mean, like, okay, anyone can say whatever they want to say, but the way the word, Intifada has even been totally mischaracterized, the way the Islamic religion has been mischaracterized in many different ways, and the way Arabic words are used. I think he fed into that by saying that he's going to discourage people from using it, as if somehow you're a terrorist if you say globalize the Intifada, which is what the people pressing him were saying. And that is not the case. That is not, in fact, true. And I think that we have to push back against that. And I think that's the ultimate nature of a lot of this, is I think it represents a good trend. But I think we've also seen this story before of people who talk a good game, who say they're going to do this and say they're going to do that. But at the end of the day, they're trying to do it within a system that is not going to allow them to do that. I mean, we can see that he's against he's against the billionaires, but then he leaves the billionaire heiress in charge of the NYPD, whose entire, approach to Palestinian protests has been to essentially eliminate the right to free speech in the streets of New York, arrest activists, completely ridiculously brutalize demonstrations time and time and time again, and in fact, who was brought in under Mayor Eric Adams to roll back the changes that have been made in the city of New York after the death of Eric Garner and after millions of people rose up and protested, Jessica Tisch, to prevent them from, acting like thugs on the street, and to really, this was Adams' whole thing, I'm gonna really like unleash the police, and she's on top of it. He, of course, was criticized for past statements he had made that were in fact true statements about the role of the NYPD, and, he stepped back and said, let's not look at that. So I think that, we'll have to wait and see what happens. I think that, he just announced today that he's got a big organization he's launching for people to fight for, the policies they want to see happen. I think that insofar as anything good does happen, it's going to be because people remain mobilized and push back and create a counterforce to the force of capital. I don't think any individual can stand up. But even in the best case scenario, many of the things people want to see are just not going to happen. And I think people have to recognize that, because you can't resolve the contradictions of capitalism within capitalism, which is not to say it's not important, but I think it is notable, because to the extent he doesn't do everything, they will then say, see, socialism failed. It was too radical. You can't do this, you can't do that. And that's not really exactly is the case at all. And I think it's important to, understand the differences here, to understand why a lot of that right-wing propaganda that will inevitably come isn't. Also,
I think this is an interesting thing, and at some point I would really love to host a sit-down debate between somebody like you, who said what you just said, and then somebody who believes in doing this, running inside the Democratic Party on a democratic socialist agenda and then winning. And we have seen, we saw it with basically the entire squad, right? We saw, and
also the entirety of Western Europe for 2 decades.
Yeah, Podemos, Syriza.
I mean, in the 80s, the socialists and the communists took over France. In 1978 to 1981, when Francois Mitterrand came, people thought that communism was coming to Western Europe, because the Socialist Party, of which he was the leader, and the Communist Party had something called the Common Program. Very radical. If you read it compared to anything you hear now, you'd be like, I can't even believe they won. And ultimately, because it was capitalism, it did not work out. And there were some things that were also against Mitterrand too, people trying to sabotage him and other elements like that. And so the economy goes down, there's all these other problems. He gets rid of the radical sort of leftists that were in his administration, brings in Jacques Chirac, people remember that name, Jacques Chirac, and then turns hard to the right on so many different issues. So I think we've seen, going back to, quite frankly, if we want to be honest about it, the 1920s. Many people who say they're socialists, who say we're going to get elected to office, we're going to win, and we're going to bring in all these good things. And I think many of them are believe that. They want to bring in good things. I don't think they're all sellouts or bad people or whatever it may be, but you can only do so much within the system. Right. And the concessions that capitalism makes to working class people are in direct relationship to the level of uprising that working class people are engaged in that make them feel that it's necessary. And so it's not that I think it's bad for people to win these positions. And I think in the case of Zohran and others, it represents a yearning for change, which is super righteous and correct. But if you don't understand the role of the position, then you don't understand its limitations. And if you don't understand its limitations, you're going to get stuck in the same cycle of reform, reaction, and never actually solving the problems that are creating the turmoil.
So reformist versus revolutionary kind of situation. And I think that also speaks to the fact that, like, for those who do support like someone like Zohran Mamdani, it's like you can't just like rest after that. Yeah. It's like getting someone elected is not the end goal. It's important to get who you want elected, but it's also like you said, like this person's gonna have to deal with a very entrenched power structure that's gonna do everything they can. They're gonna bring down the weight of the federal government with Trump, which we haven't even gotten to what Trump's going to do here. They're going to bring down the weight of the Democratic Party machine of capital to like get in the way of every like modest proposal this guy has, even the most modest proposal. And so he's actually said it himself. He's like, you have to keep pushing for these things because it's like you need those people in the streets so that when you're dealing with that entrenched power structure, you can say, well, there's a million people outside and they want my head if I don't raise taxes on the rich. Otherwise, I mean, if you just go home, and I was at the election night rally, the official one from Mamdani, which we live stream, which people can go check out. And I thought that, I kept putting that question to people. It's like, okay, great. Like now he's elected. I see, everybody, it was a very celebratory feeling. And I have to say, I've drank the Kool-Aid a little bit. Like I like Zohran Mamdani. I think he's great. I'm impressed by his sharpness. I'm impressed by his ability to do hostile interviews, by his ability to debate. I like most of what he's proposing. But I also recognize the limitations you're talking about. So I asked people like, all right, like what happens next? And a lot of people were making the point like, well, we can't do what we did when, and I'm not comparing Zohran Mamdani to Obama. But
same situation in some senses.
But we can't do what we did when Obama was elected, which is just go home. We have to stay pushing. And so it remains to be seen. Like, will all these people like in these various organizations, grassroots organizations across New York City that supported him, when he does something to capitulate, eventually he will. It's just what happens. He'll capitulate on this or that issue with this or that appointment. It's like you said, it's kind of like the natural outcome of the capitalist system we live under. So when that happens, are you going to hold his feet to the fire? Or are you going to sit back and be too scared to criticize him, which is what happened with Obama. It took a while for people to criticize AOC for her limitations as well. So, that remains to be seen. But I still think it's, still all the significant things we mentioned. And it also, he's going to be dealing with not just the entrenched power structure in the city of New York, in the state of New York, but on a federal level, because Donald Trump is basically going to try to coup New York City. Like, it's like he's going to try to regime change New York City with a lot of people helping him in the Democratic Party as well. Like you see these billionaires talking about we're going to flee the city and take our capital with us. Maybe they'll do that. Maybe they won't. Maybe half of them will. I don't know. But either way, that to me sounds like sanctions.
Yeah, for sure. And look, they did it to Trump. I mean, when he announced the Liberation Day tariffs and then the economy just tanked. Yeah. Like, that's not like some just like, law of gravity. That's like investors being like, we don't like this, so we're going to tank the economy until you change things. To give a right-wing example, Liz Truss. Like, and I'm saying this because Trump is pro-capitalist. Liz Truss is pro-capitalist, and she said, let's do some really capitalist stuff with the budget, but it was too much, and so the markets, they just tanked. So they'll do whatever they want to do. And I think the other thing that's relevant about this is Trump has extraordinary power to disrupt Mamdani, but even just the existing Republican agenda is a war against cities. Because see, the thing that people forget is that the One Big Beautiful Bill was just a small part of the budget. They're actually, after the shutdown, whenever it's over, are gonna go back to like the rest of the budget. And all of the things they wanna cut around housing, around all these different pieces, especially around housing, will hurt New York City and every other major city in America and make it significantly more difficult, for people to be able to do positive things in the way that they wanna do them. So even that in and of itself is a major challenge and one that, we'll have to continue watching. But we'll have to continue watching the whole thing. Let's see what happens here. The transition team leadership has been announced. They have the website out for resumes, so I guess we'll start to see how the administration is filled out